a háide gurmai agah as Hijacking lum and seo. Is anna mór dú Lord Shui mo comrade Frank Stagg, a fuair boss association a Hearn. On the 12th of February 1976, 45 years ago today, IRA volunteer Frank Stagg died after 62 days on hunger strike. It had been Frank's third hunger strike in 3 years. In 1973, a number of IRA volunteers, including Dolores Price and Marion Price, Hugh Finney and myself, were convicted on conspiracy charges and were given life sentences. We immediately demanded that we serve our sentences in the north of Ireland, and when refused, we embarked on a hunger strike. 2 other IRA prisoners, Frank Stagg and Michael Gaughan, who were serving sentences in Parkhurst prison, joined the hunger strike early in 1974. The British government decided to forcibly feed us. Force feeding is a particularly barbaric and terrifying and savage practice. It is self-evidently inhuman. During a visit with his brother George, Frank told him that it felt as though his most inner core was being attacked and pulled apart. He said the experience always left him exhausted because instinct insisted that one resisted it with every ounce of strength he had. As well as being inhuman and degrading, force feeding was, of course, also an extremely dangerous procedure. Done as it was by the use of extreme force to subdue the prisoner, on occasions Frank and the rest of us were left with cuts and lacerations to our mouths, lips, gums, throats, and damage to teeth. And of course, with force feeding, there was always a constant danger of inflicting serious or fatal injury to the internal organs of the hunger strikers. Describing the physical and mental effect on a hunger striker when being force fed is very difficult. I spent 205 days on hunger strike and was force fed on 167 of those days. My experience of those brutal assaults were no different from Frank's or my other comrades. It took me many years to write or to talk of my experiences. I did, however, finish a poem in 2016 in memory of Michael and Frank, and I would like to share an extract of it with you now. 12-handed they entered in angry flood, frothing hospital white on incriminating blue. Under doctor's orders, trailed up the bed with jackknife body to the high end. Her pulled head forced back, steel cold to his neck, for a throat to stomach line that would be straight and true. Fear fought dedication in the rebel heart as his breath battled through gated teeth. Now, ordered the doctor, open your mouth, and so it began in clenched, mute refusal. Naivety left the naked to join the clothed, and both discovered the power of a spirited no. Forearm anchored forehead, knuckles boring jaw joints, forceps scraping gums, Ral's tube searing nostrils, the soft membrane hot with pain and blood, surgeon turned jailer in prison's privacy. Jaw muscles are strong, but not strong enough. Gasping with pain, a vice kills the cry. No time for self-pity as the clamp is adjusted to force a tube down famined throat. Motionless dread fills the pinioned body. Movement is rebellion and clinically suppressed. No speech is possible. No motion of limbs, protest undiluted in dilated eyes. This is the surreal experience of nightmares where great fear invokes paralysis. In 1974, Michael Gaughan was fatally injured during force feeding and died the next day on Monday the 3rd of June after being on hunger strike for 64 days. He died at 24 years of age. The British government tried to spin that he died of pneumonia. The Gaughan family, however, stated that he died after prison doctors injured him fatally when the force-feeding tube was pushed down his throat into his lungs. Exactly the same death endured by Thomas Ashe so long ago in 1917. Frank Stagg, who was brought to Michael's cell shortly before he died, later confirmed that Michael told him he was dying because they had forced the gruel into his lung. Michael sent a last statement for his comrades on the outside, and it read, "I die proudly for my country and in the hope that my death will be sufficient to obtain the demands of my comrades. Let there be no bitterness on my behalf, but a determination to achieve the new Ireland for which I gladly die. My loyalty and confidence is to the IRA, and let those of you who are left carry on the work and finish the fight." The death of Michael caused worldwide concern for the welfare of prisoners, and pressure was heaped on the British government to concede the prisoners' demands before there was any more deaths. Sometime afterwards, the British government agreed to transfer the political prisoners to the north, and so the hunger strike was called off. However, as always with the British, there was a sting in the tail. Frank Stagg was sent to Óglach prison in the British Midlands, where after a short recuperation, he was denied all the concessions he had won, and he was back to square one. Another consequence of the hunger strike was that the World Medical Council now outlawed the practice of force feeding, declaring it to be inhumane and unethical for doctors to participate in. This forced the British to ban the practice of force feeding. Frank Stagg was now totally isolated, and to make matters even worse, the prison authorities now started to strip search all his visitors, including his 73-year-old mother when she visited from Mayo. He was also denied access to educational or recreational facilities and was held mostly in solitary confinement and on a punishment diet. He felt he was left with no choice but to use the only avenue of protest left to him, that was hunger strike. Already weak from the previous strike, he was after 35 days in his hunger strike in a much weakened state. At that stage he received a visit from the prison governor. The governor confirmed that Frank's demands for no strip searching of his visitors, access to recreational and educational facilities, and a reasonable date for a transfer to the north were being met, and so Frank ended his hunger strike. A few weeks later, he was transferred to Wakefield Prison. Wakefield turned out to be a punishment in itself, a dreary, grey, damp, unheated Victorian stone building. The governor in Wakefield immediately reneged on the deal Frank had been given in Óglach, saying that it was nothing to do with him, and he ordered Frank to be put in solitary confinement with no visits for refusing to do prison work. The solitary block in Wakefield was in cellars beneath ground level, with no windows or natural light, and with a thriving population of rodents. Again, Frank was left with no choice but to protest in the only way open to him. He was forced once again to go on hunger strike for a third time. His demands were simple: an end to solitary confinement, no prison work, repatriation to prison in Ireland. But this time, he declared that his protest would not end until he had arrived at a prison actually in Ireland. His demands were not met, and after 62 days on hunger strike, he died on the 12th of February 1976. While the British government caused his death, it was the Dublin government who reserved the last litany of indignity for Frank. They were to hijack his body from his family and deny his dying wish to be buried alongside his comrade Michael Gaughan in the Republican plot in Ballinas's League Cemetery. The plane taking the coffin bearing Frank's body to Dublin from Leeds Airport was diverted in mid-air away from Dublin and where it was scheduled to land and where his family were waiting to receive it. It was instead forced to land at Shannon. The Southern Special Branch then seized the coffin and locked it away in Shannon Airport, refusing to allow anyone, including Frank's family or even his mother, to visit or to be near it. After about 24 hours, it was loaded onto an army helicopter with uniformed Gardaí and flown to Mayo for a sacrilegious funeral. No funeral cortege has ever been seen to match this one. There were no private cars, but approximately 20 armoured military vehicles and about 50 Garda personnel carriers. There were Army and Garda scout vehicles up ahead clearing the route. and roadblocks were set up as the cortege passed to prevent anyone following. On arrival at League Cemetery, the coffin was dumped in an outlying grave, about 100 metres from the next nearest grave. A guard hut was then set up, where 3 Garda at a time, in shifts, overlooked the grave. 24 hours a day, all visitors to the grave, including Frank's mother, were recorded, questioned and photographed. After 18 months of this, one day in July 1977, a concrete lorry was seen to enter the graveyard, and with the top removed from Frank's grave, 3 to 4 feet of mass concrete was poured on top. This was supposedly to prevent his comrades from carrying out their promise to, at the earliest opportunity, remove Frank's body from this Free State prison grave and reinter him with his comrades in the Republican plot. A few days later, the guard hut was dismantled and the permanent Garda presence was withdrawn. Apparently, they were secure in the knowledge that it would be impossible, using only manual labour, to get through the concrete to the coffin. But the fools, they reckoned without the wisdom of old Mrs. Ginty, a lifelong Republican and caretaker of the cemetery. Shortly after Frank had been buried, Mrs. Ginty contacted Frank's brother George and suggested that he should buy the plot next to where Frank had been buried. When he asked why, she simply said, "You never know," and she added, "Say nothing to no one." George bought Frank's grave and the vacant one next to it, all for the princely sum of 5 old Irish punts. Now, with the Garda watch gone and the plot next to Frank still vacant, Mrs. Ginty's words of wisdom became clear. It was just a matter now to dig down into the vacant plot, alongside and then onto the concrete to release the coffin from its prison grave. George and Mrs. McGinty's son Gerry hatched the plot. Having cleared it with the Republican movement, they organised a unit of 6 colleagues, and on a dark, cold, wet November night in 1977, and after approximately 8 hours of hard digging, they had the coffin bearing Frank's body removed from its concrete tomb and reinterred safely beside his comrade Michael Gaughan and the other Mayo martyrs in the Republican plot. George described sleeping easy that night, and he felt certain that Frank and his comrades did too. During Frank's hunger strike, a huge amount of pressure from the British, and unfortunately the Irish authorities also, was directed at Frank's mother to try to get him to abandon his principles. She was in her mid-70s and was a staunch Catholic, and certain politicians and clergy apparently thought that she was ripe for persuasion. She had visits from at least one bishop who advised her of the deadly sin of suicide and the sins of those who encouraged it or failed to discourage it. Understandably, there were members of his family who wished Frank would come off the hunger strike for the simple reason that they could not bear him to die. But others explained that only he knew what he was going through and what he would have to endure in an English prison if he came off the protest. Frank's mother was unshakable in her love and support for her son. She believed that it was the family's duty to support Frank in whatever decision he made, and she resisted all attempts to dissuade her, despite the enormous heartache she felt. There have been 22 Irish Republican hunger strikers who have died since Thomas Ice in 1917 until Mickey Devine died in 1981, the last of the H-Block hunger strikers to die. All of them were individuals who had families, who loved them and who were loved by them. Each have their own story. What binds them together is that they all believed deeply in the freedom and independence of their country, and that they were prepared to give their lives, if necessary, to achieve a new Ireland. This year is the 40th anniversary of the 10 young men who died on hunger strike in the H-Blocks of Long Cash in 1981. There will be virtual events organised for all of us to celebrate the lives of these young men, and I would encourage everyone to take part in these. However, the most fitting tribute we can pay to Frank Stagg and all of his comrades who died on hunger strike is for us all to carry on their struggle, our struggle, to achieve the united Ireland they died for. Jimmy Frank Uan Óglach, agus dag sé an da hampla doing, agus dag sé an dúslan doing. Tá sé de Jurgas orin fish agus Iceland shagya a chulianu.
In a cruel British prison, a brave Irish soldier lies, body thin and deep with hunger, as the light fades from his eyes. By his side, two women weeping, one is old, the other young, on their knees to God appealing, in their soft, sweet Mayo tongue. "Ah, my love," the young man murmurs, "do not cry your tears for me, for my time is nearly over, and today I will be free. I can see a bright sun shining on my own green Mayo fields, and I see dear Michael Gaughan waiting there beneath the trees. In that cruel British prison, just before the break of day, with his loved ones there beside him, that brave soldier passed away. But he lives in Erin's heart yet, and wherever flies her flag, Ireland's sons and Ireland's daughters will remember brave Frank Stagg. Yes, he lives in Ireland's heart now, and wherever flies her flag, Ireland's sons and Ireland's daughters will remember brave Frank Stagg.
So